Hi there, I'm Kate McClellan, and I've been a professional wedding planner for over 20 years now. I started Planning Collective when I noticed that though most couples are super excited about getting engaged, they quickly feel overwhelmed and intimidated by the actual process of planning their weddings. If left unchecked, this can lead to massive burnout and the urge to scrap all your plans and just elope. While this is totally normal, you don't have to sacrifice your sanity for your dream wedding. In the Wedding Planning Collective podcast, I'm going to share the processes, tips, and tools that all engaged couples like you need to feel confident, supported, and excited about your wedding plans again. Let's get started. Hey, before we jump into today's episode, I want to share a free resource that I think every engaged couple should have. AI can be an incredible wedding planning tool, but it can also give you some really terrible advice. The tricky part, if you've never planned a wedding, is that it's hard to spot the difference. And that's exactly why I created my AI wedding planning cheat sheet. Inside, I'll show you what AI is really great at when it comes to wedding planning, where you should be cautious, and how to use it to save hours of time without letting one bad AI answer derail your entire wedding plans. Plus, you'll get 30 copy and paste prompts to help you with everything from budgets and timelines to vendor emails, wedding website wording, guest list questions, and design ideas, all written specifically for wedding planning. Think of it as your AI guide to planning smarter, not harder. You can download it for free now at planningcollective.com/AI. All right, let's get into today's episode. Hey guys, Kate here. Welcome back to another episode of the Wedding Planning Collective podcast. Last week, we talked about why wedding planning can suddenly feel so overwhelming. If you listen to that episode, you know and understand why it usually isn't because you've forgotten something or fallen super behind. But at some point, the planning shifts from making a few big decisions to hundreds of tiny, small decisions. And today, I want to talk about another way that you can help prevent that from happening in the first place. Hopefully, if you're listening to this, you are in the earlier stages of planning because this is going to be the most helpful for you in the earlier stages, but that doesn't mean that this can't help those that are listening that are further along in the planning process. After helping with literally hundreds of weddings, I've noticed something. The couples who seem the calmest and to be enjoying the process the most, making easier decisions, staying on budget, they aren't necessarily the ones that are the most organized than everyone else from like a spreadsheet standpoint, but they've had the important conversations in the early stages of planning that really help them feel confident while they're planning the wedding. So today I want to talk about those 7 conversations that I wish every engaged couple would have, ideally before they start booking their vendors, but it can be really helpful to have these conversations at any stage. Once you've had these conversations, every decision is going to feel a little bit easier. Think of it as building your wedding foundation. We talked about that with your priorities, right? Once you have that foundation, everything else has something solid to stand on. Okay, the first conversation I want you to have is, who are we planning this wedding for? And it might sound simple. I honestly think, though, it is one of the most important conversations that you could have because the answer is going to be different for every couple. Is this wedding primarily a celebration about the two of you? Is it about creating an unforgettable experience for your guests? What about honoring family traditions? Or is it somewhere in the middle? If it was just up to the two of you, would you go and elope somewhere, but you know that you want your family involved? That would indicate that your family and friends are a huge part of your wedding planning process. And maybe that's who you're planning the wedding for. There isn't a right answer. There isn't a wrong answer. The only real mistake is never having this conversation to begin with. I've seen couples argue over guest lists, ceremony traditions, even the budget, when the real issue wasn't any of these things. It was that one person was planning a wedding centered around their family, while the other was planning a wedding that was centered around the two of them. Once you're on the same page about who you are planning this wedding for, so many future decisions are going to become much easier for you. Conversation number 2, what do we want people talking about on the drive home? Even if you decide that you're planning this wedding for yourself, I love asking couples this question because it immediately shifts things away from like a Pinterest board. When your guests are on the drive home after your wedding, what do you hope that they're saying? The food was incredible. We danced all night. That ceremony was so personal and totally them. They looked so happy. Maybe it's the photos they got to take home with them or the atmosphere. Maybe it's the decor. They were blown away walking into their reception room. So pick 2 to 3, and those are going to become your priority. Because when you know what matters most to you, you stop feeling like everything deserves an upgrade. Because as I'm sure you figured out, those options for upgrades are everywhere. The third conversation should definitely have been part of your priority conversation, but how many people are you inviting? This doesn't necessarily mean you need to have a guest list totally finished, but about how many guests are you thinking? Is your dream wedding just the two of you eloping or bringing immediate family? Maybe you're thinking more of an intimate dinner party, or do you imagine being surrounded by all of your family and friends? What does that number look like? Is that 50, 75, maybe 300? Your estimated guest count is going to affect almost everything when it comes to wedding planning. It determines what venues you should be looking at. It changes your catering costs, your bar costs. It impacts all your rentals, your floral, your invitations. The list goes on. Whatever the vibe is that you're going for, break out your notes app or a pad and paper and do a brain dump of everyone that you would want to make the cut. It's great in theory to say, we want a micro wedding with no more than 20 guests. But once you start listing the names of the people you absolutely need to be there, it could be closer to 40 or 50. Again, no right or wrong answer here, but making sure that you're on the same page is what is really important for this conversation. Conversation number 4, how do we want this day to feel? Not necessarily what colors are we using, not what flowers do we want. What is the vibe or the feeling that you want you and your guests to walk away feeling? So it's similar to thinking about what you want your guests to be talking about in regards to your wedding, but really focusing in on the feeling. Do you want it to be relaxed, elegant, romantic, sophisticated, casual, high energy, intimate, intense? That feeling helps become your filter with these decisions. It helps you choose the venue, the music, the decor, and everything else. Because the question that you're asking no longer is, do I like this? But instead, you're asking, does this create the feeling that we're going for? Now, conversation number 5 is not going to be a fun one because I want you to talk about how you're going to spend your money when you can't have everything. Because let's be honest, even Taylor Swift had to compromise with her wedding. Maybe not from a budget standpoint, of course, but I'm sure her initial dream venue was not Madison Square Gardens. But she also knew that it wasn't possible to maintain her privacy and safety in a backyard garden of a castle estate. Nobody gets everything on their wedding wish list, not even Taylor Swift. At some point, you are going to have to make choices. You're going to have to decide to cut some things. And for most of us that aren't billionaires, that typically comes down to the budget, right? Maybe you'd love to do a live band and an upgraded floral installation, but the budget only allows one. And this is where I encourage couples to decide before you're in the middle of those decisions. When we have to choose, what wins? And this really comes back to the other conversations we were talking about before, right? Is it the experience? Is it the food, photos, party, decor? It could be any of these things. None is right or wrong for any particular couple. But having these conversations now makes the trade-off in the future feel less emotional. And it makes sure, again, that you're on the same page as you're making these decisions. Conversation number 6, what are your absolute yeses and your absolute nos? Similar to how you're going to make a must play and an absolutely do not play list for your DJ or your band, you want to do the same for your overall experience for the wedding. Every couple has them and they're going to be different for every couple. Maybe your yes list is a first look before the ceremony or exchanging private vows while you're having breakfast on the morning of the wedding. Perhaps it's a live band or it is that floral installation. Your no's could be a bouquet toss, no party favors, or those matching robe photos. Perhaps it's not inviting children. The more clear you are on these items beforehand, the fewer times you're going to have to revisit these conversations or have the start of the conversation, but not really clarify as you go down the road. So list out these non-negotiables early on, and it's going to help you stay strong in your future decisions. And conversation number 7, how are we going to be making these decisions together? This might be my favorite conversation that I want you to have because it's honestly a good skill for you to have going into your marriage. Take inventory about both of your strengths and weaknesses and be honest with yourselves so you can divide the wedding planning tasks out for what makes the most sense. If someone is more type A than the other, they might be perfect for keeping track of the budget, doing some of the vendor research. If one of you is a little bit more creative, maybe you're the one that's going to do the mood boards and have some of the creative impact to it. But beyond the individual tasks, think about things like, do you want to have a weekly wedding planning night so it doesn't feel so scattered? When you disagree, how are you going to decide? How long do you want to research things before you make a decision? What things are important to you individually, and what things do you not care about so much? You'll likely find out that something is important to your partner that you don't care about. Because as much as wedding planning is about making decisions, it also is good to go into it with a system so you're ready to make those decisions. Now, one of the biggest parts of this conversation that I want you to have is, how do you plan to involve others in the planning process? If you have family or friends that you want to be involved in the planning process, or maybe the mother wants to be involved in the planning process, how will you weigh their decisions as a part of the process? Couples who can figure this out early on are usually going to enjoy the planning so much more. Again, this might be the most important conversation that you're going to have because it's not just about the wedding, right? But it's talking about life in general. You're going to have people that are sharing their opinions and wanting to be a part of the process, and deciding how you're going to handle that as a couple is going to really help you throughout not just the planning, but throughout the marriage. Now, hopefully, you've noticed that every one of these conversations really builds upon the one before it, or there is a tie in between a lot of them. Maybe you decide to go about this by having 7 literal separate conversations. You talk about each one of them individually, or maybe you feel like it's best to grab a pizza, pour a glass of wine, and talk through them all in one evening. The way you do this or the way you have these conversations isn't necessarily the important part of this. They could be considered one big conversation. But the important part is that you talk these things through, again, ideally in the early stages of planning, but really at any point, whatever point you're at, it's making sure that you're both on the same page with what is important to you throughout the planning process. Now, if you enjoyed today's episode, I would love it if you would take a quick second to rate, review, and subscribe. It would help more couples find the wedding planning help they need, and it will help me keep these free wedding planning tips coming your way with new episodes. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next episode.